Welcome to the WOVA Circle, real talk on fertility, wellness, and trying to conceive. I'm Gabie Peytchev, founder of WOVA Health and fertility educator. This podcast is your community space for navigating the path to parenthood with evidence-based insights, authentic conversations, and genuine support. I'm dedicated to being here with you through every part of your journey. Hi everyone. Today I'm going to be talking to Alexandra Stockwell. She's a physician who turned into a relationship and intimacy coach. And I just finished reading her book called Uncompromising Intimacy. And I've been also actively using her application. So I feel that I know you already. And I also have been using your advice quite a bit in my relationship. Super excited to talk to you today. Welcome.
Thank you. And I love that. I remember the first time that somebody went through, actually, it was the Aligned and Hot Marriage program, and then did a private coaching session. And so at the beginning, for me, I felt like I was meeting this couple for the first time, and I started to introduce myself a little bit. And they're like, oh, no, we already know you well, because they'd been watching my videos. So I just enjoy how you opened that up. Yeah.
Yeah, well, for the audience also to know you a little better, would you mind sharing a bit about your story and why did you turn into an intimacy and relationship coach? What triggered that for you?
Sure. So let's see. I met my husband in medical school and we got married. I had my first child, my third year of medical school, my second just before my internship. And when we got together, we were definitely in love. We, of course, had to work on things, but overall, our communication was good. Our collaboration was good. We made decisions together well. But it almost felt like a really successful partnership rather than a hot, sexy marriage, rather than something where the erotic energy flowed between us. And I mean, we were both working 90, 100 hours a week, and we had children in diapers for a while. And so I really just assumed that once we had more time together and we're both better rested, that the more romantic part of our life, whether it's in or out of the bedroom, would really blossom. And once we had more time together, I wasn't working nights and weekends, and he was only very occasionally working weekends, nothing changed. And that was when I learned love is not enough and having time together is not enough. And I just wasn't really sure if it would be possible for the two of us to connect in a richer, juicier, more adventurous, more alive way. And so one possibility is that it just isn't possible, and the other was that it was, and if it was possible, I wanted to figure out how. And I did a lot of different, I read books, I experimented myself, I did trainings, and one of the trainings that I did for my own marriage was a very deep dive into sensuality and sexuality, and it was for essentially lay people, and also simultaneously it was a coach training. And at the time, I didn't know what a coach was. That was not why I was there. But I was a physician and very oriented to health and well-being of my patients, of course. And so I went to the teaching lab just curious, how do you teach this? How do you help others? And I just felt like I had come home. And so while I'd already brought my own marriage very far along, as I continued to make it more alive, more nourishing, hotter, I also trained to be able to help others. And since then, yes, as you mentioned, I've gone on to write a book. I have an app. I have many programs and all kinds of different things. I used to actually have a coach training, which I no longer do. And really my deep mission is to change the cultural narrative around long-term relationships so that instead of thinking they're where we go to make babies and have a pleasant long-term companionship, that really marriage is a place where passion continues to grow with each year. I don't just mean in the bedroom. I talk kind of interchangeably about aliveness. Sure, it's sex and passion and erotic adventures, but really it's about how alive you feel each day, and whether when you look at your partner, it feels like a business partner might. Like you're aligned in the big things, but inside it's a little numb, it's a little bland, it's a lot of compromise. Or your relationship is really kind of the portal to so much that's good in life.
Your story is so inspiring. I love how you turned this into being available to help others and being willing to help others. And I remember in the book what I read that stood out to me is that you wanted your children to be happy. And you notice how your relationship at home is affecting them, and how your relationship in your house when you were little, the relationship between your parents and what happened was affecting you. And you figured that if you want to help children be happier, then the parents need to be in a happy relationship. So, I mean, even saying this is giving me goosebumps right now. I feel that this is such a strong mission or philosophy behind what you do, and it's very inspiring.
I appreciate that. It's not the thing that most people pick up on, but it's very real for me that absolutely the very best thing I can do for children is teach their parents how to have a great relationship. And I assume it's not so relevant for listeners of this podcast, but I think that is true whether people are married or they're divorced. That's not where I focus my attention professionally, but I think no matter what the situation is, whether you've been married for 20 years and expect to be married for the rest of your life, whether you got divorced after 2 years, like it doesn't really matter. Either way, the relationship can be better and more inspiring and provide your child with what they need to not have to work through the things that you work through in order to create a healthy, nourishing relationship.
Yeah, and you mentioned time. Oftentimes we're so busy, we think that if we have more time, then this relationship is going to be in a better state. But like you said, this is not just about time. There's something more important underneath. And when you are trying to get pregnant, for example, the relationship often suffers and you don't know what to do. There's also situations where the relationship was never really a good fit in the first place, but you feel stuck with this person because now also time is running out and you really want to have a child and you're not ready to leave the relationship because you're scared. Or there could be situations where you're dealing with secondary infertility. You already have a child, maybe you have two, you want a third one, but your life is already so busy. You've lost really the sexual desire, the intimacy between you two, and you don't know what to do about it. And yet you're so focused on getting another child into the family. That's why I feel this topic is so important for so many people across different life stages, really, and different relationship stages. And yeah, I'm super excited about this conversation today. Something else that really, really stuck with me when I started using the app was how we were always taught that we need to compromise in a relationship. And you said, no, this is not about compromise. Let's talk about this because this is really different from traditional couples therapy, like you say in the book. And I really like the way you're going with this. Can you talk more about this?
Absolutely. And it's not just the common relationship advice in traditional couples therapy. I just think throughout the Western world, the advice that is given is if you want a great relationship, you need to compromise. In fact, once I really developed my method, I happened to be looking at the wedding cards I had saved. I've been married over 30 years now, and some of the Hallmark cards from 1996, sure enough, compromise as guidance was in the wedding cards, no less.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think we need to start with definitions, because when I think of compromise in the context of a long-term relationship, I think of it as withholding what's true for you, withholding your desires, your challenges, whatever's real on the inside, withholding that so that your partner is more comfortable. And there are times when that works in life, and there may be like specific moments when it's not a good time to share. But if that is your general mode, to compromise, to withhold what is most real for you so that your partner is more comfortable, essentially acquiescing to that, what that creates is a bland companionship at best. Because we are whole people, and if we're holding back some part of ourselves regularly, there is no switch inside a woman that when we get to the bedroom, we can like flip it on and be fully expressed and fully present with all of who we are in the way that's essential for really nourishing sex. If throughout the day, there are important parts of us that we just are leaving on the curb when we walk in our door, or just forgetting they're a part of us altogether. So the name of my book is Uncompromising Intimacy. And by uncompromising, I really don't mean that you always get your own way. It's not like that. We're talking about a relationship. But uncompromising intimacy is rooted in, first of all, knowing your own desires, your own inner experience, what you're really feeling, and finding the ways to express it so your partner can hear it. They don't need to feel criticized. I mean, they may, but the point is not to criticize them or invite defensiveness or shutdown. The point is to share what is true for you, because when you are authentic and real, uncompromising in the way that I mean this, that really is the context for creating the most nourishing, dynamic, intimate marriage. And I was actually thinking of this when you were talking about the woman whose the biological clock is ticking, the calendar months and years are passing, and she's already invested so much, and it feels so risky to leave. Is she going to meet somebody else and be able to make it happen before it's too late? So what do? You just compromise. Well, in that situation, I'm not suggesting that a woman takes what I've just said and say to her partner, the truth is, I really would leave if I were 10 years younger. That's not what I'm suggesting. Because part of the skill of uncompromising intimacy, there are 6 different skills, and one of them is being kind. And the point is to create more connection, not less. But in that scenario, if that applies to you as you listen, you might think to yourself, okay, well, what is it that you actually want more of? Do you want to be having more fun together? Do you want to feel more heard? Do you wish he would pay more attention to you? Do you wish he'd be on his phone less? Identify what is it that you really want, and that is the thing to convey. I just wish that we felt more connected. Is that something you want to figure out together? So again, it's not, I've really been thinking about leaving because I feel frustrated in this marriage. No, you can say, I'm not telling anybody what to do. I just don't think that that serves the purpose of improving things. But what does is being vulnerable and sharing what you actually want from your wanting it, not from criticizing what's absent.
You work with many couples. Now, when you tell them how to incorporate all of these different pillars into their relationship, do you see any resistance from one side or the other?
You know, I get very specific. Even though I'm talking about big things which tend to feel mysterious with intense frustration and so forth, I'm actually very practical in the guidance that I give. So I could dial this down to be more practical, but I want to set people up for success. And I think the main resistance is she may think, and I work with some lesbian couples, but mostly the vast majority are heterosexual couples, so I'm going to speak in him and her language. Sometimes she says, I don't actually think he's interested. And to her, I say, then you need to learn how to say it in a way that isn't off-putting. Because it's both knowing what we want to say, being real with ourselves, and finding the way to say it that actually is conducive to connection, not disconnection. Now, his response more often is, why is it always me who needs to change? However, when I work with couples privately, I definitely find that they are both willing to try. At the point at which they're investing the time and the resources to get the guidance, they're both willing to try. And so I think maybe a better way to answer your question is to say that I definitely have had many women contact me and say, I really want us to work with you, but my husband is just not interested. He doesn't want to do it. He doesn't want to work on things. And so I used to think, okay, he doesn't want to work on things, let's move forward from there. But now I know she means it, but I know better than to believe it, because I then say to her, okay, we'll see if he's willing to have a 15-minute conversation with me, just the two of us. And sometimes the husband is unwilling to talk to me for 15 minutes. But 100% of the time when he does talk with me for 15 minutes, he's then willing to proceed with working together, because the main thing that he doesn't want is to have working on the marriage equal his needing to fit her agenda and her way of viewing things and her way of saying things. So she may well be more attuned to the problems and be expressing them with her perspective. We all speak with our own perspective. But as soon as he talks to me and realizes that, yes, I have her back, but I also have his back too, and I am very sympathetic to his experience also, then he's willing to participate. The number of men whose wives think they just don't want to work on their marriage, who actually are extremely willing to work on the marriage when they feel like their experience is also going to be honored and their desires are also going to be prioritized, well, then we can definitely go far together.
It makes a lot of sense. I was frightened by the statistics you shared. 50% of first marriages fail, about 60% of second marriages fail, 73% of third marriages fail, and you mentioned that 1 in 4 couples, so 25% of people stay together for the kids. What is really the cause of relationship going sideways? Is it what you mentioned in the book? You mentioned there's really no real role models in the world, in our life, outside, in our family. Oftentimes there's missing role models and we don't really know who to look up to. we don't know what a real relationship is supposed to feel or look from the outside, so we can try to make it work for us. Is that why? Like, why are amazing relationships after a while getting to this point where they don't know what to do next?
I think it's precisely because they don't know what to do next. In other words, there's so many people who are extraordinary problem solvers in the professional realm, and even pretty good problem solvers when it comes to, I don't know, managing household matters or raising children if they're stepchildren or there already is one child. Like, not always, there's some real challenges with parenting, but often people can use their educated intellects to figure out what to do. But when it comes to marriage and relationship, intimate relationships, we really are mammals who learn through imitation. So when it comes to calculus, we need our prefrontal cortex. When it comes to investments, same thing. But when it comes to how to speak with our partner, when it comes to self-esteem and self-honoring and learning to be more embodied so that we're more aware of our sensual experience. You know, when you're drinking coffee or tea, are you really tasting that as you do so? When you get dressed in the morning, are you really feeling the fabrics on your skin? Like, what I'm trying to point out is that in general, we are very disconnected from our own bodies and from any kind of internal wisdom about how to do relationships, because relationships really are a learnable skill. However, we haven't been taught and we haven't had it modeled. So some of us are lucky enough to have parents or grandparents with a great relationship, but it doesn't mean that observing them takes us as far as we need to go with whomever we're married to. So my bottom line answer to your question is that I think there's a real lack of role models, and there's a lack of role models for navigating the things that we navigate in our busy modern lives. And there's a real underappreciation for successful relationship as a skill that can be learned the same way that we learn how to drive and how to manage employees and whatever it is that we've learned to do. There's a learning curve, and it's actually kind of funny because making love and being married is unusual in that the longer we do it, often the less skillful we feel. Whereas other things in life, the more we do it, the better we become. And so I think learning the skills to communicate well and not just hope for emotional closeness, but really use skills, practical ways of being in order to foster more emotional connection. And then same thing in the bedroom, that there's just a total lack of appreciation for how important it is. That just because we're married doesn't mean we're expert at being married.
Couples who are trying to conceive, and even if the relationship was amazing, and maybe even now it's amazing and they're supportive to each other, but it becomes really hard to have real intimacy and enjoying sex when you're looking at the calendar and you're looking at your ovulation date. What tips do you have for them?
Okay, I have 3 tips, and each one's a little bit extensive. So the first one starts long before the bedroom. I think one of the biggest sources of disconnection within a marriage is when one person is having one kind of communication and the other person is having a different kind of communication. So a kind of stereotypical example of that would be a woman who says to her husband, I feel so overwhelmed with IVF, and what if it doesn't work? And, she's just sharing her emotions, and he responds with something that's kind of problem solving. It's like, well, did you talk to the doctor yet? And what did she say? Okay, and are you taking this? And are you gonna schedule with the therapist? Like, she just wants to be heard. And this can be true when it's related to the infertility journey or the fertility journey. And it's true when it's about, I don't know, someone misplacing something in the house. Like, this is true for big and small issues. Sometimes we just want to share what we're experiencing, and then if we get problem solving back, it just leaves us feeling unheard and disconnected, and he's confused because he was just trying to be helpful, and how did it make things worse to be helpful? Anyway, that's just an example, but if you're listening and you want more connection with your partner, I highly recommend that the two of you together make a list of the kinds of communications that you have. So logistical communications, maybe financial conversations, visioning and daydreaming about the future. I taught this at a workshop once, and somebody said gossip. So if gossip is one of the kinds of conversations you have, vulnerable conversations, venting, conversations about sex and intimacy. Each couple can have its own list, call it different things, and not everyone has the same things on it. Sometimes praying together. Anyway, whatever, spiritual conversations, whatever it is, you want to have a list of the kinds of conversations you have, and notice if there's some you'd like to be having that you're not, then you can add those to the list so you're aware of it. And then the main thing that I really recommend, this isn't going to surprise you because you've been on my app for a while, but when you want to make a communication, the first thing is to be clear in yourself which kind of communication you want to have. And then the second is to say to your partner, I want to share something vulnerable, or I really want to talk about finances and get to the bottom of this, or, whatever it is that you want to be doing. I want to share some of my feelings that I haven't shared with you before. Whatever it is, you say it and then ask, are you available to hear it? And that really needs to be a real question, because if he's not available and says yes, it's not going to be successful. But as someone you're married to, saying no should really be a version of not yet. And so you can make a plan for when you do discuss it. But the point is to get opt-in and also to clarify what kind of communication it is, so that you both know, oh, this is a vulnerable communication, or, oh, this is a communication about the future where we're just daydreaming and window shopping. We're not actually committing to take that trip, but we're just going to talk about it and like have fun with that. Whatever kinds of communications you want to make, that you ask, are you available for that kind of communication? And if it's appropriate, share what kind of response you want. So if, for example, you want to share just all of the feelings you're having about what is going on with your fertility, go ahead and say, and I just want you to listen and give me a hug, or hold me as I share and afterwards. Because if you know what you want, if you don't know what you want, no problem, then don't say it. But if you do, he wants to give you what is going to make you feel better. And he may well not be able to figure it out on his own. So that is my first suggestion, because when that is happening, that has you feel synced up, more collaborative, more on the same team, more cherished, more connected. Any comments before I go on to step number 2?
I really like what you said because I don't think any person in a relationship does this. We usually just say what we're going through. We express our feelings, we express our frustrations with the relationship or with something else in our life. And this completely changes the whole conversations because first you ask for permission to make sure the other person is ready to listen. Maybe he had a terrible day. Maybe this is just the worst time to discuss something like this. You explain why, but you also tell them what you expect from them. And I feel this is especially important. Like you said, men oftentimes want to fix things. But if you tell them up front, you don't need to fix anything. I just want you to listen to me. It's going to change the whole conversation.
Yes, and I think it's when you feel it's true, it's not always true, but it often is true, to say, what's going to fix this is you just listening and hearing me. Because he does want to fix it. So let the behaviors you want be the fix.
Yeah, well, share number 2.
Okay. Particularly when it comes to monitoring ovulation and scheduled sex and then not having sex and having sex, like all of the different important rules and considerations. One of the unintended casualties that usually happens is non-sexual physical touch just drops right off as well. And that doesn't need to happen. There doesn't need to be that correlation. But when we're so focused and kind of in stress mode about when the sex happens, we inadvertently give up affection, more foot rubs, like allowing the hug or even the kiss, just because it can't lead into sex when you're scheduling things, but there's a way to really cultivate the physical, sensual connection, have both of you feel loved and connected with one another through your bodies, not just your really important goals, in a way that really, truly is not sexual. So if he used to give you foot rubs and he hasn't for a while, well, ask if he would. And if you like romance, just light a candle while he gives you a foot rub. Or maybe get a collection of interesting oils to try and give one another massages. Both of those are a little bit more time consuming. There are things that are much quicker too, which is just before you leave the house or when you return, make a point of having a real hug. It doesn't mean that you're leading him on or even that you feel particularly erotic. You don't need to feel turned on and erotic when your body is in another phase of life, but you still can really connect. And oxytocin, the bonding hormone, the hormone that is at its highest right after a baby is born while you're bonding with a newborn, well, not as much, but that hormone rises when we hug our partner, not like a shallow hug, but when we're front to front and truly embracing. Or even oxytocin rises with eye gazing, but there's no touch with that necessarily. So I really want to emphasize non-sexual physical touch. And for any couple, what that means is going to vary. It could mean holding hands or really snuggling on the couch, foot rubs, massage. It could involve more intimate activities that don't involve sex as most Americans tend to define it with one particular act. Like there are other things that you can do to experience pleasure if you're into that, like if that's what you feel like doing. But it's also fine if you don't. The main thing is more non-sexual physical touch will just have you feel more alive and more like a woman who's married rather than a vessel kind of calibrated for conception. You can be a vessel calibrated for conception and also really enjoy the richness and connection of non-sexual physical touch. And maybe it requires a conversation saying, this doesn't change anything about what we're doing in bed or when we're doing it. So I don't want to lead you on, but let's turn up the physical connection again without risking anything in terms of conception. So that's the second point. Anything you want to comment on?
That's beautiful. I love it. I have one question, real quick question. If both partners have different, maybe we'll call them love languages, if somebody, like one needs more touch and the other one doesn't, how do you advise that they communicate, and how do they meet? Do they meet in the middle without making a compromise?
Well, I believe the love languages are really wonderful to create more understanding and connection when there's disconnection, but that actually, as human beings, ideally, we all expand our range and are able to give and receive love in all of the love languages. Now, some are going to be easier and more accessible, more natural. Some are going to be more of a stretch. But if one person's love language is touch, then that person needs to modulate to what is comfortable for the other person. And the other person really needs, for their own sake, as well as the love between the two people, to find their way to relax and connect through touch as well. So it's one thing if love isn't a primary love language, but it still feels good. It's another thing if touch altogether is uncomfortable. So let me address both of those. So I don't think that touch is one of my primary love languages, which means it's not my first go-to. And at the end of the day, it is one of my husband's primary love languages, and he knows this. So what does he do at the end of the day? I mean, I'm in my 50s. We are not trying to conceive children, so we're not in that situation. But regardless, when we get into bed, if he's feeling like he'd like some intimacy, he usually says to me, "Would you like a massage?" And I always say yes, not because touch is my love language, but because I'm stressed and it helps me relax at the end of a full day. And sometimes he gives me a massage and I relax and go to sleep. And sometimes he gives me a massage and I relax and turn over to face him. And I don't know, I should ask him if he is good at predicting which way it's going to go. I don't feel like I'm so good at predicting, but it really doesn't matter. The point is that for someone whose love language is not touch, you can find the ways that work for you and make sure it's calibrated so it doesn't feel pressured or uncomfortable. That was the point that I was saying, that the massage helps me relax. Now, the other consideration with that is maybe he doesn't touch you well. Maybe you like lighter pressure and he is too strong in his touch, or vice versa. Maybe you need to teach him that as a woman, we tend to like touch that starts at the periphery. I have a podcast episode on this that I can send you to include in the show notes, but basically men are more like puppies. They want to just start licking and be touched in the face and go right to the goods right away, whereas women are more like pussycats, and we need to start by petting the tail and the ears long before a cat will roll over and expose its belly. So similarly, if you don't enjoy touch, maybe you can well, just share the episode that'll be in the show notes. But the bottom line in that episode is that you start maybe touching your hands. And when you're ready, go all the way to the elbow. And this isn't really about modesty. It's about starting at the periphery, starting with a foot rub long before you're available to have your breasts touched, which is not really non-sexual physical touch, but I'm just saying that what I've just described is true for sex as well as for non-sexual physical touch, that, maybe you want a little bit of hand through your hair, because basically our head, our fingers, and our hands and our feet are the most peripheral, and start the touch there. And that allows us to breathe deeply and enjoy it and be ready for something a little bit moving towards the center bit by bit. So there are a lot of different ways that if you don't like touch, you can think about what would work for you and share it, not criticizing how he's done it before, but saying, would you try just when you touch me to start with my hands and slowly move inward from there? Let's see if it's more comfortable for me. And notice I did not say, because all these years when you just start right with massaging my belly, it just gives me the ick. There's a way to say it that has him want to participate more.
Awesome.
The third recommendation I have, so just to review as you're listening, how to create more connection when sex is so scheduled and pressured and complicated. The one thing is to really open up communication and be clear what kind of communication you want to have so that it's satisfying and nourishing for both of you, because if that is happening, that already improves everything in the bedroom as well, and also outside the bedroom. Second thing is non-sexual physical touch. And the third thing that I would advise for every woman in every stage of life, and it's especially important during the fertility journey when it's challenging, is to make a point every day of having at least 5 minutes of pleasure. I don't mean sexual pleasure, although if you want to masturbate, great, that would count. But really to think of the 5 senses. What food or drink do you love to taste? What smells just please and delight you? What sounds? It could be birds in the garden. It could be particular music. Like, what do you enjoy hearing? In terms of touch, sure, it can be touch with your partner, but I also think in terms of what are the fabrics on your skin, and how do you touch yourself when you wash your face? Are you scrubbing like it's, I don't know, a metal sink in your, or are you caressing your face while you wash it and just feeling good? Or maybe it's about curling up with a cup of tea and a fuzzy blanket that just makes you feel good. The point is that as women, pleasure is so nourishing, and it is not an intellectual endeavor. It is something that happens in the body through our 5 senses. And you can be having sex, you cannot be having sex. I mean, depending on the time of the month, I don't mean in the particular moment. It's still so important for your nervous system, for your experience of yourself, for replenishing your proverbial cup, so it's not empty. I mean, I could say a lot of scientific reasons why this is so important to cultivate pleasure and activate your parasympathetic nervous system. But really the bottom line is that it's not like oxygen in that without it we can't survive. But there definitely are parts of ourselves that can't survive without the nourishment of a few minutes of pleasure each day. And I think there's no day that's the wrong one to start.
I like this. When you are trying for a baby, and especially if you know this is not going to be easy for you, you can really lose touch with yourself and with everything around you. And this is a good way to come back to life and come back to what you used to enjoy, maybe foods that you love to eat.
Or dancing, anything.
Exactly. So yeah, beautiful, beautiful. You talked about conscious redo. Would you explain that? How does that apply in practice?
Yes. So one of the things that happens in most marriages is that there are particular issues that are challenges or conflicts, disagreements, and sometimes it's the same content, sometimes it's different content, but it feels like you just get trapped in that disagreement over and over. And so when this happens, when this dynamic happens, you might discuss it for a while, verbally process it. You hear his side, he hears your side. And then a week later, the same thing happens again. It's like there was no progress made. And so I really wanted to figure out how to interrupt those patterns to create something new. And my answer to that is the conscious redo, although you don't need to wait for a long-standing pattern. You can use it anytime the two of you find yourselves like off, feeling. It can be mild or intense. You just are off with one another and don't feel on the same team. So when that happens, instead of hashing through what he meant and what you meant and how you wish he had responded and all of that, you can just essentially turn back to when things felt good between the two of you and proceed from there and take a different route forward. Now, it's very important to go back to where things felt good with one another. And I think it would be helpful to give an example. So I was coaching a couple, and our sessions were on Fridays, and they had been locked in disconnection since Monday. So I wanted to facilitate a conscious redo for the two of them. And so I said to them, well, when were things good? And he said, Monday morning. And then when I said I wanted to go mountain biking, her response, and then he just detailed her response. And then they had a big fight, and they basically hadn't been talking to one another since. So I said, okay, let's go back to Monday morning. You're having your coffee, and you want to go mountain biking. How are you going to say that to her? And then how is she going to respond? And she gave her response. And then I'm skipping a number of steps in that particular conversation, but they basically then proceeded from there, and he felt great. But she didn't. And I hadn't seen that before. And so I said to her, well, did you actually feel good before he talked about going mountain biking Monday morning? And she said, no. When he came into the room on Sunday, I was already in bed, and he turned on all the lights, and he was loud, and I just felt disrespected, and I was pissed off. So Monday morning, when he then talked about going mountain biking, that was just on top of how he hadn't really considered my needs the night before either. So it's like, okay, well, that is why she doesn't feel better. So we needed to go back to before he went into the room that way. And I said, okay, let's take it back. And he then said, I wish I had gone in more quietly. And then whatever communication he made Sunday night, he said it, but with a lot more gentleness and connection in his voice and words. And so then she relaxed, and then they went forward and had the interaction about mountain biking Monday morning, and they both were smiling, and it was kind of like, why weren't we talking for 5 days? Well, sometimes it's better not to rework everything that's happened. It's important to have that skill, but sometimes you can just go back to where things were good and proceed from there, as long as you both recognize where you made a wrong turn. Otherwise, it won't be better the next time.
How do you apply this in the moment when you're in the heat of an argument?
Okay, well, as with every tool that I ever teach, I think it's important to start small when the topic is not ultra intense or ultra important. So you build the skills using the tool, and then you're both more competent at applying them when things are intense. So I'm going to answer your question, but let's assume both, like here, I'll use my husband and I. If we have a super intense moment, and let's say he says to me, let's just do a conscious redo. I'm going to have one of two responses. Either I'm going to say, okay, should we start at this point? And he'll say, no, I already felt you were being rude to me. Let's start further back, further upstream. And I'll say, okay, and then we'll proceed from there, and it'll be great. Or he might say, and either one of us can request it, but let's just say he says, let's do a conscious redo. And I am so angry that I know if we start over again, I'm going to say the same thing because I am pissed. Like, this is a conscious redo is not an alternative for a muzzle. So I'm going to have to say to him, actually, let's just take a pause. I'm not ready for a conscious redo. Let's do it later because I'm going to go take a shower and do some things, and I will calm myself down. And one of the things that can be hard with that is for the person who requested the conscious redo, you don't want to be left hanging having no idea when it's going to happen, because it's very common that in couples one person wants to talk about things and the other person doesn't. So if the person says no, then you don't know if they're just never going to bring it up again, and you're left in limbo. So at a minimum, you want to say, okay, well, let me know when you're ready, or I'll ask you later tonight or tomorrow or whatever. Like, it just depends how triggered the person is, whether or not they're able to have an appropriate, considerate conversation about when it happens. But I want to be very clear that if someone isn't available for the conscious redo in the moment, that's not a free pass to just not resolve the thing.
You mentioned that the typical traditional couples therapy usually talks about conflict resolution. But what you've noticed in your experience with couples, what you notice, it's usually conflict-free, passion-free relationship. And that also stuck with me. And that you also mentioned that it's oftentimes, even if couples come with bedroom problems, they kind of automatically resolve themselves once you work more around the and if I'm not saying this correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, but on the emotional side of things, the emotional safety maybe is what we call it.
Yeah. So there are two different things you're bringing up there. One, I'll just share also with a story. A couple that I worked with, when they came to see me, they hadn't had sex in 9 months. And the relationship between them and me was new, and I was clear that the two of them were not so connected. So I didn't really start with anything in the bedroom. I started with the tools of uncompromising intimacy that we've talked about, including being kind, I mentioned that one, but cultivate curiosity and just rebuilding their rapport and their emotional closeness. And so after maybe 3 sessions, I saw that they were no longer disconnected. They were beautifully connected. And so I thought, okay, now we will start talking about what happens in the bedroom. But they were a very proper, buttoned-up couple, and so I wasn't explicit. So I said, well, let's talk about the original issue that you wanted to work on. And they both were kind of confused. And then at one point, her eyes opened, and she just put her arm around him and said, oh, we're all set. Because as soon as they were able to be themselves, feel seen and heard and honest, and really understand one another's experiences, well, that emotional intimacy absolutely paved the way for passion and sensual intimacy as well. And in my particular practice, that is true a good 80% of the time, that when the emotional aspects in their relationship are dialed in, then the passion follows, and maybe 20-25% that's not the case, and then we actually do focus on how they're touching one another and what's happening in the bedroom. And in the way that I was talking about earlier, in order to have emotional closeness, there needs to be self-awareness and self-expression. In other words, it's not about clamping down, avoiding things that are uncomfortable for you or for him or between the two of you, but to really be able to be authentically your whole self. And when that is the case, there absolutely sometimes is fighting and conflict, more in some marriages, less in others. But I do think traditional couples therapy focuses on conflict resolution and keeping people out of fights, but then the result is that truth is compartmentalized and buried, and that really is an impediment to the flow of passion. So I'm not pro-fighting, but I am pro-self-expression and pro-being real with one another and growing the capacity to hold your own in one another's emotional range, which, if it's super narrow and polite, is going to be narrow and polite in the bedroom too. So if a couple comes to me and they have a lot of fights, I'm looking for how to channel that energy into the bedroom, not to dial it down to 0.
Nice, interesting. So passion is a good thing, and maybe you have passion that just needs to go somewhere else.
Yes, that's right. Redirect the passion.
Redirect the passion, exactly. I'm going to close this episode with a question that I have for the listeners, but also a question we both can answer for ourselves, just while they're processing and trying to understand what the answer is for them. A question you posted on social media and I absolutely loved. What has made you alive today?
Well, I have 2 contenders. One is this conversation. I just love the way you have read my book and absorbed my material. And so the questions you've asked come from someone who's really digested and integrated my life's work, and that is a very enlivening experience. And I will say that I have a coach, and I've felt some disconnection between us compared to how we usually are. And I named that today, and now we're more connected, and that is a very enlivening thing. So while my teaching is all about how to do this within marriage, I think it really applies in every meaningful relationship.
Beautiful. Well, what made me alive today, also two things. Of course, this podcast conversation. I have to admit, I am so honored to have you as a guest, and it really is making my day. I can't even believe that I have an opportunity to talk to you and for you to share your wisdom with me and the listeners. It's really a dream come true. I'm so thankful and grateful for you, for the work you do, and for being here today. And also, I today took some time for myself. I did a 5-minute breathing exercise to calm my nervous system, because I realized I've been so busy and passionate about WOVA, the app that I've been building, about making sure I have enough time with my kids, with my husband, and then so busy that I can't even spend a minute to stop, to pause and take a breath. Those 5 minutes in the morning were definitely something that I needed, and I plan to continue with. And this conversation, thank you.
Thank you so much.